So the NXL World Cup took place over this past weekend, which was the 3rd to the 5th of November, I believe. Yeah, Friday the 3rd to November the 5th. And anyway, I've mentioned before on the podcast that the two sports I pay attention to are hockey and professional paintballing. And the NXL World Cup is essentially it's the Stanley Cup of paintball. It's the most important tournament of the year. So it was going to be a very interesting matchup to see the teams push their limits. Me personally, I was cheering for Edmonton Impact. I enjoy Edmonton Impact because I've watched their gameplay over YouTube for a while now, and I've enjoyed them. But they're also the only Canadian team in the Professional Paintball League. So anyway, the gameplay for Professional Paintball works as so. Over on these two sides, we have the starting bunker where both teams will start with their guns or part of their body touching the bag until the timer goes. At which point they'll break out into these bunkers, into their formations, and try and pick off the other team. And generally, off the break, we will see this would be a pretty standard breakout for any team, a very conservative one. And what we have here is hold on. Alright, doesn't want to work with me right now. Not the time to not be responding. Finally. So we have the snake side, or the wire. Oh, Jesus. So we have the snake side over here, and then up here we have the Dorito side. And then in the middle we have the pocket. So the main objective for both teams is over here on the opposing team's starting bunkers is a buzzer. Now, it originally used to be actually a flag that would be positioned about right here, and both teams would have to try and rush the flag into the home team and touch it up against the home team wall in order to score their point. But this has changed over recent years, and what they've done instead is they've installed a buzzer. I'm pretty sure the main reason for this was because the teams anyway pretty much wouldn't go after the flag until the entire enemy team was taken out, and then they would run it in to get their points. So instead of having the teams go after a flag, they just installed buzzers instead, so at the end of the round the other team can run in and press the buzzer. Now, if both teams are still alive, one team can run in and press the buzzer and get the point and end the game. But generally, they wait until the end of until all players are picked off, until they go and get the point. So what would end up happening is off the break. Generally, usually it would be switch to white. It would be these two, but sometimes this guy here, depending on the break they're doing. Their main job is simply to lay down fire on the enemy side. These guys will be given the majority of the paint, and simply they just fire down the enemy teams, which will allow their wing player, specifically the Dorito player, to work his way up and get better shots on the enemy on their side, and the snake player, who will work his way up and the same thing takes place. They'll try and fire on the enemies from a flanking position. So this is the standard of the game, and you try and pick off all your opponents. You have a 16-minute time limit. Each round ends whenever either you hit the buzzer or a team concedes a point, which can be done from the dugout by the coach or another player. Generally, it's done by the coach, though. So this is the main layout of the game and what the object is. Now, as we take a better in-depth look at the map, we can see here that this would be up at the center 50, as it's called. And you generally have a guy right here. So you have your guy here, and he would most likely be laying down fire if he got up to this position, probably on the sides. That really would be the most likely. He would try and hit the domino player here, or maybe a back player, which is, you can't see it, but the bunker would be something about there. Or he'd come over here on the side, lay down fire on the snake, or one of the other bunkers over here. And if he was tall enough, he would actually stand and fire through these slots here on either side of the W. And from here, they kind of play a dual position. They can play a defensive one of laying down fire, or they can play a more aggressive one in taking out the enemy. Now from here, we're back in the starting position. So generally from where this camera shot was taken, you would see that's where we're starting from. So our breakout would go in a few different ways. We can either go up here to the domino, Dorito, I always call it, for some reason I keep mixing it up, the domino. We can go over here to the snake side, or we'll come up here to our center can and we'll lay down our fire downrange. So this can pretty much get played always off the start, but I would say it's not a good place to stay for a long period of time. It's good because you have these lanes of fire. You can hit the enemy while they're running to their bunkers right off the break. However, these curves, the way it curves over here, as you know, a cylinder will curve around. That actually leaves the flank exposed to getting shot from the side. So as the play moves up, you're going to want to either retreat back to a better bunker or push forward to one that has better coverage. Maybe, possibly, you'd want to go up from there into this insert bunker over here. Or, a lot of times, you'll make the move back over here to the left to the standing up bunker, and then from there, once it's clear, you'll make the move into the Dorito side. But generally, the player playing from this can is a defensive supporting position. Now, here we are over in Dorito 1. And the way that this works is the whole 1, 2, 3, 4 numbering works from whichever side you're talking about. So this over here is Dorito 1 for my side. However, if I'm talking about players on the other side, this one up here, which I believe is Dorito 1, would be considered Dorito 1. And then as we're moving up, so as we move up, this is Dorito 2, Dorito 3, and Dorito 4. And then probably this one right here is Dorito 4 on the other side, but when I move up into that position from my side, it would be considered Dorito 5. So it all depends on which side you're calling it from and how this works. The same thing on the snake side, but we'll get into the snake side in just a minute. So Dorito 1 is the farthest back bunker. And generally, most of the plays off the break would for the tournament would actually go to Dorito 2 because it was a really good possibility of getting there. But owning on this Dorito side was very important, and we'll see why we get over to the snake side. But from here, generally, more often than not, the Dorito player would be laying down fire over here. I'm going to switch to another color. Actually, you can't really see that among the red. So be laying down cover fire over here to avoid the snake player from getting into position. And then whenever that's not on the go, he would probably be firing this way towards the Dorito player. And one thing that made Dorito 2 better than going strictly for Dorito 1 is that the fact it kind of was positioned out over here, first off, it gave you a closer proximity to the snake, which made your shots over there easier. And you had a much better advantage if you were sitting here. You had much better cover than anybody trying to get into the snake. So it brought you closer to them. And then at the same time, it gave you an angled shot back into these Doritos over here. So you could possibly bounce a shot in order to get a hit. Because in paintball, you know, you can, on these airbags, you can bounce the shot off. And then when it hits the body, it can, it'll break on them and they'll be called out. However, it can work the other way where you'll hit somebody, but a paintball won't break. So it's considered a bounce off. And the shot has to break to count. So even if you're hit, if the shot doesn't break on you, then you're safe. So Dorito 2 was the preferred one off the start, and for good reasons. It was a better position than if I'm sitting over here. I only have one straight line of fire up here, directly straight. I can't really get angled around here to fire at the guy, so only one lane of fire. I'm more exposed to their back players from here than over here. Here I can kind of, because of these cans, I can just point my gun out and fire. Over here, if I do the same, they can see me in the back along with the Dorito player. So 2 was preferred over Dorito 1 off the break. The Dorito side was actually the dominant side for this tournament because of the way the snake was built up. And again, we're getting to the snake in just a second. So here we are in Dorito 3. So yeah, got Dorito 4, and then Dorito 4 for the other side, but Dorito 5 for me. So once you got into this position, this was kind of the deadly area to be on the Dorito side. This was because you could get good shots over here on the snake for any players playing there. You had a much better angle on anybody playing the center, so you became a much more deadly target to them, and you could finally make your shots back towards people in the back. And if you wanted to, you could jump around over on this side over here to fire up at them to get another angle. So it was a deadly position to be in once you were in Dorito 3. You just had a lot of angles to shoot from, and the way that the bag is set up, it offers you a lot of protection. So this is why the Dorito side was the dominant side for this tournament. That being too is that the snake, the way it was set up, didn't offer a lot of positioning. A lot of cover. So we have Aztec 1, the Aztec bunker, and then we have the Aztec bunker 2, which is in the far side. These here, 1, 2, and 3 are insert bunkers. So generally, most breakouts, the player would come back to Aztec 2 over here on the snake side. But if it was a more conservative breakout and they were keeping their positioning tighter, then he would just plop back here to the Aztec 1. So from here, the job was to lay down fire. Wow, that was a bad angle. Is to lay down fire mostly on the snake side to prevent them from moving up. But other than that, you didn't get a lot of good shots from back here because both of their back players, which are located about right here, you don't have good shots at them. You can't hit their Dorito player, and you cannot hit anybody that happens to be sitting on the other side. Wow, that's bad drawing. It's paint, so this is supposed to be a guy here. Yeah, I know, bad drawing. But anybody on this side, you don't have any hits. Really, your only option is this area over on the snake side. That's really what you're covering. But you're not staying here. Eventually you want to work your way up. So we have here snake 1, snake 2, and snake 3. So most would reach this snake here, the first snake 1, and would get a little bit of cover as they fired up. But the main goal is to work their way up here. Now they're going to be prone at this point. They're going to try and work their way up here, or depending on how things go, they'll try and work their way up the side. But it was also common to get somebody, maybe a back player, who was making his move upwards, to maybe come up here along the snake and dive straight into snake 2. But most snake players came from the back Aztec side, so it would be more worth their while to make their way on the far side, on this side over here. Just offers them more cover. But the reason that the snake was not a dominant force inside of this game, a few made good uses of it and did turn into a dominant force, but for most of the teams, it was such a bitch. It was a bitch because even by the time you got up here and you started making your way into the snake, you had so many angles you could be shot from. If they had somebody in the 50, he can make shots sideways toward you. And once you were in Dorito Snake 3, you could be seen from the Dorito side, so this offered opening over here to be shot too. So you could be fired on from every single angle of the field, and these little snakes here, these snake bunkers, didn't offer more cover than really just enough to lie down behind. And some people can angle their shots over, because once you get to a certain distance, you can angle your shots. The ball will start to fall, and it can actually go over the cover and hit you. So it was very difficult to play this position and move up. You're relying heavily on the movement of your other team. You needed your teammates to be covering your approach. Generally, I found that a snake player couldn't make it very far inside the snake if he didn't have another player behind him covering his ass. But you needed more focus on the Dorito side of the field over here in order to really get up and make the snake effective. So then as we look at the map from one side, one strategy on a breakout was this. So one of the most common ones, 2, 3, 4, 5, just gave a nice steady line of cover all the way across. So this strategy, which was usually employed on a more defensive, once the team was being more defensive, if they had a lead they were trying to hold on to, it just gave a good steady coverage of fire across the field. Another strategy that was used many times, okay, hold on, is you get your player over here, you get your player up here, you double up on the can, and usually I would say the snake player would put themselves right around here, maybe over here depending on the breakout. Now this one was good because it gave a nice tight rate of coverage for these back players. I found that this was usually used. This was actually very popular at the beginning of the tournament by Edmonton Impact, but I found that they ended up abandoning it by about their maybe their fourth game. They were really starting to abandon as a regular breakout just because people started to become aware of it. The other thing about the snake player making his way over here to these insert bunkers was the fact that it gave him a much easier, it gave him more options to work with when entering the snake or playing the game. If he's over here, then he can make the run up here for a little more cover, or he can make the more direct, wow, that was bad, hold on. he can make the more direct route into the snake. Over here, if he's over here on the right, which I'm going to use gray for, just because of the color differential. No, you know what? We're going to use black. Fuck it. As for if the snake player is over here, he has a pretty good cover into snake 2, as long as when he gets out behind the second insert bunker, as long as he gets past there, he makes the dive into snake 2, he usually would be okay. But this would be the alternate breakout, and then we of course also had a very aggressive one. For an aggressive one, we would have, as usual, we would have our man at the can and our man at the standing up bunker, standing up temple. And we would have, generally, we would have one guy, he would go one of two. He would make the regular jump into Dorito 2 immediately, or he'd take the risk and try and go to Dorito 3. However, if he did go for Dorito 2, generally he was not there more than a few seconds before he made his leap into Dorito 3. This was done in desperate situations. We would have one man who would usually go right up to the 50. If he didn't make it, he would stop at this can until he could make his approach up. But a lot of times, if he could make it right to the 50, he would just go straight there. And then, generally, he again would not be someone who stays there, but he would make a move out through these two standing cans into the temple that is right over here. It is the same bunker here, just mirror image of it. So he'd make his move into the bunker here. And we have our snake player, and they would go for an aggressive opening into snake 2 immediately. Generally, once they got there, they would then move through, they'd squeeze their way in between there, and usually I've found they'd squeeze again in between here, stick their head out here, and they'd start popping off shots. These guys, as things started moving up, would make their approach. This guy usually would move up to Dorito 2. This guy would either move his way up to the standing can, or he would move his way over to the insert bunkers to maybe try and get a better angle. The Dorito 3 player would be moving up aggressively too. He would generally be maybe a little bit behind the guy in the 50, the center player, right here. So he'd be moving up aggressively along the Dorito side, popping shots as he goes. So that would be an aggressive breakout. This was done a few times through the tournaments. Generally, if a team was down by 1 point and there was, say, a minute left in the game, then they would try and push that last point to tie it up. And if we look at this graph here, this is just illustrating the firing zones of a team on the standard breakout. For this one here at the back, I got the 2 at the can, and then I made a move over here. This was because generally it was difficult to tell. It kind of depended on the situation where this player would sit. On a regular breakout, he usually move over here to the Aztec. If they needed a tighter range of fire, he would sit here for the breakout until he made his move over here eventually, if he didn't make his move upward. But generally, I found that if they were doing a move like this, it was a more defensive move, so they would also move over to the Aztec. Impact was using this play, but also I feel like they were also using it for the games that they were winning, at least mid-game where they were winning, so that way they could hold their lead essentially. And we can see when they go for a more basic spread breakout, which would mean that this player over here by the center can would actually be over by the Aztec. We see we have a nice spread rate of fire. That it's generally spread out across the entire field. Where if he's over here and we double up on the center can at the back, it allows them to have 2 tight angles of fire downrange, rather than just had it spread facing forward, which basically means you're going to get into a firefight for a while if you do that. But with these angles, it actually gives you the opportunity to start popping off shots. And then here are the death zones that were set up for World Cup. And we can see here at Death Zone 1, it was set in between the two Aztecs. I found that it wasn't that bad for getting shot off the break. It did happen where you were going these Aztecs, but generally it was more of a death zone once the game actually got on the go after a good 10 seconds or so and everybody was in position. And that was because, as you can see, we have different areas that could be fired down there. We have the 50, we have the inserts, and we have the two back Aztecs, as well as our center can, which I didn't actually mark, but we have a back center can that can hit. And then we also have the snake, if you can make it there. We have Death Zone 2 and 3, which are between the Doritos. And that was, again, because of the angles. But generally, I found that it was over if you were sitting primarily in Dorito 2 for the opposite team, because then it gave you a good line of fire. So these ones were difficult to get to, and it had to be careful while making their moves. But the reason that the domino side was the more dominant side of the map was because of this over here on the snake side. As we can see, it was being branded the funnel of death. And that was just because of all the different angles of fire that could be brought in on you from the snake and the very limited cover that's available. Sure, these bunkers here, these snake bunkers, look like they're a decent size, but when you're getting fired on from the side too, they don't offer a lot of cover. Especially because we almost have a V pattern in the middle leading from the snake into the pocket. And that just funnels all the fire down into you. So for their first game, they were playing the Los Angeles Ironmen. The Ironmen have been a long-standing team inside paintball. They've been active. They were one of the earliest teams active and have dominated the series for a while. However, over the last couple of years, they've started having a rough patch. And especially 2017, they just really haven't done very good. Edmonton Impact, on the other hand, who's designated by the blue, Edmonton Impact actually had a very good few years. They ended up winning the World Cup last year in 2016. And they've been dominating the last 4 years. I think the last 4 years they've been on at least the top 4, I believe, ending in tournaments. So it looked like it was actually going to be maybe an easy game for Impact because Ironmen are sitting in, I believe, 10th overall, while Impact is sitting number 1. But it didn't turn out the way we had hoped. These first two couple graphics are not very detailed, but then I go into more detail for the rest of them by round 3. So this is round 1, and these markers are just where each team ended up off the break. And as we can see that Edmonton Impact is designated by the blue, they're going to be designated by the blue the entire time, and then their opposing team is going to be designated by the red. So we can see the breakout that we had here. We had some more focus on the pocket with them going to snake side, while Edmonton Impact seemed to focus on the snake. I think this was some of their problems maybe, is that they went snake side off the start, and that was just not a good choice. But we also had one man who was dead off the break. That didn't help them, so they were immediately down a 5-4, and they ended up losing the match. They ended up losing the round. As we move on to round 2, we can see that we had another Edmonton Impact player dead off the break. That was hard for them off the start. And they kind of traded person for person, but the game was going on for a bit, so the coach for Impact ended up conceding the point because it was going on for too long, and they had the disadvantage that would put them down by 2, so they wanted to get back in the game sooner rather than later. As we get to round 3, Impact starts making a comeback. We have the Ironmen who actually die off the break within the first 3 to 4 seconds. As we can see here on the left, their player ended up making he ended up holding back for a second firing, and then he tried to make a move towards the insert bunker, but he didn't make it. Soon after, we had another player for the Ironmen that got killed over here in Aztec 2. And then Impact started to make their move up the snake side. So as we can see now, this is actually a good position for them where they can make a run up the snake side, and it's a more effective run because they've eliminated most of their danger on the snake side, most of the LA players on the snake side. As we can see here, one of them in the center can, by the 20 second to 30 second mark, moved into the insert bunkers, but even so, it's actually not too bad because he doesn't have the best line of fire down on Impact's player here in the snake. Meanwhile, we have our center, our back player, and our Dorito player for Edmonton Impact who are laying down fire over here on the Dorito side, as well as a little bit on the snake side. But this is keeping the Dorito player for the Ironman busy, so our snake player can move up. In the end, Ironman end up getting eliminated, and Impact takes the point. So we looked like we may have seen a bit of a comeback, but then things took another turn for Edmonton Impact. We had another dead off the break right over here on our top left. And then they started getting into positions that we could see here. Edmonton Impact center player moves up to the 50, but he gets picked off because of the Ironman top right. He makes the move over to Dorito 4 at the 20-second mark because he had an opening. And because of this, he got a good line of fire down here on our Edmonton Impact player, who eventually was picked off at the 45-second. So a little while after that, our center player decides to make the move down here to the standing up temple. And he held it for a little while before he finally got picked off, and I believe it was by that Dorito player sitting there for Edmonton Impact. But in the end, Edmonton Impact lost too many players, conceded the point on a 4v2. So we're up to 3-1 for the Ironmen. As we move into round 5, things did not look good for the Ironmen off the start because our Dorito player top left, he makes it out there, but he got hit off the break and didn't tag out. So when the ref noticed that, he calls him out, calling a minor penalty, and he pulls this center player, this back player, down by the standing up bunker. He gets pulled for the penalty. Ironmen are down 2-1 immediately. Ironmen are down 5-3 immediately. Sorry about that. That didn't really last because very soon after we got one player for Impact got picked off on the Dorito side. And then it looked like Ironman may have held out, but then almost all at once the players got knocked out. Our two back players over here got knocked out at the 1 minute mark, and then the center player there was nothing left for him. He easily got picked off, giving Impact the point. Edmonton Impact off this first game were having a lot of problems with people dying early, because as we can see, we lost our two corner players at the 8-second mark and the 10-second mark. Our center player made a move up to the center 50, but then ended up pulling back, and he ended up dying at that can. I actually think that was a bad move because that can does not offer a lot of cover. It would have been better, in my opinion, to make the shot to try and make the shot from the 50, but I believe he was also trying to shoot back at these two Aztec players on the Iron Man side on the bottom right. So it would be a better angle, but it left him way more exposed, which ended up costing him. And eventually Impact conceded the point when it got down to a 4v1. So this goes back to what I was saying earlier, how a lot of concessions can score points for the other. Impact so far has conceded at least half their points, maybe more. While this situation is a little better, 4v1, you ain't winning that. There's no way you are winning that. But it just shows how if you do concede too many points, I think they conceded, I saw a 3v2 earlier. Now, they didn't know how the rest of the game was going to go, but maybe that was one where you want to try and fight it out. Depending on how long the round is going, which, again, I believe the round did go for a while, so that was why they conceded. But as we get down here to round 7, but for this one, Impact came out strong and finished off the team before the 1 minute mark, giving themselves down to just 1 point. We had another concession by Impact for this one, as they lost their Dorito player early on, and then they lost their center about 30 seconds after that. And this, along with losing their insert player, required Impact to again concede. But now we're getting down to a point where they couldn't really come back because they were running out of time. So at this point, we only had a little bit of time left on the clock, and the time actually ran out, so the match ended. And so Impact lost to the Ironman, which was a little bit disappointing to see, considering the season Ironman has had over the last couple of years. But it was an early game. It was the first game that Impact was playing inside the finals, so one loss was not going to cost them the whole tournament. For Impact's second game, they ended up playing Green Bay Boom, and Boom didn't do very well during the World Series. They had a lot of rough games. I think they won one game out of their whole series. But as we can see here, the first match lasted for a little bit over a minute, with Impact taking the score. As you can see down here on the bottom left on the Boom side, I have dead time ? That was because they were called out, but I wasn't able to figure out when, because the camera wouldn't have been on them and the announcers didn't call it out at the time. Maybe they were preoccupied with something else, so they didn't manage to call them out. So when I noticed they were out, I usually would put a time limit. But whenever I put these question marks, is because there was a significant time limit in between. Usually they would be focusing on one side of the field before they do a wide shot. And so in that time, I had no idea when that player died. So I just marked him out with a question mark. I had a bit of trouble here on the Snake side, as both their players got tagged out. And their center got caught off right quickly, because that Boom player made a crazy run right down the middle right off the start to get out their center player before he got tagged himself by this guy who moved over to the insert here at the 7 second mark. So what ended up happening over here is, as the rest of the players were getting picked off for Boom, leaving only one alive here over on the Dorito side. He moved over into Dorito 3 at the 26-second mark, but he was stuck there. So our player over here, on the top right, our Dorito player for the Impact, he ended up, after making the transition to Dorito 4, he made a good run down. And actually, I like the way he did it too, is that he came in on the outside, which immediately would put this guy, as soon as he saw him, back into his bunker, because, you know, it looks like the guy's going to shoot at you. He's also rushing you, so, you know, you want to get yourself in a small position before you fire back. So it's going to take that player's eyes off him for at least a second, to at which point he curves back to go and run in behind the next bunker, behind the next Dorito, and he comes up behind the player and snaps off his shot before the Boom player can turn and get his shot on him. It was really well done, and that was actually what won the game, and he runs down to hit the buzzer. And that was the opening for the first round against Boom, so that was a very good round for Edmonton Impact. Actually, they did well. However, this next match was spectacular. This next round. So as we can see, there was a lot of movement by the Edmonton Impact side, and especially over here on the Snake side, they managed to get two players into it. And this is what I was saying earlier when I found that two players were effective inside the Snake. Because if we look down on Edmonton Impact side, the one player goes from the one player who was doubled up on the center can, he makes the run across over to the Aztec, and then soon after he makes the run into the Snake. Now during this time, this player in the back, Aztec 2, the bottom left corner, he's laying down cover fire for his player moving up. This allows him to move into the Snake, and then as his player gets farther and gets into the 50, that allows him to move up to the Snake number 1, which eventually moves into Snake number 2 soon after. But this allows him to get closer, get some better shots while supporting his player. It's essentially a military tactic, which is, a fire and move, which one person lays down some cover fire while the other one goes. It's very commonly used. I think it was possibly created during World War II, I believe. No, World War One actually. It was a World War One technique because they needed to fucking use it to stay alive while attacking trenches. But anyway, it's a very good strategy, especially for this snake, which is called the funnel of death for this one. And actually, I think the one thing that also made the impact player move into the snake position, the one that's back here at Aztec 2 on the snake side, I think one thing that made him move in is if we look over here on the boom side, their player made the run from the back Aztec to the insert into the snake within a few seconds. So with his player being there at the 50, moving up to support him would be the best choice in there, because at the same time, while this player may be in the 50, if his attention is directed down towards the pocket or the Dorito side, then he's not going to see this player moving up. So this moving into the supporting position allows him to give him cover. In the end, Boom concedes 5-1, giving Impact a 2-0 lead. Boom in this one just died all at once. It was all within like the 30-second mark. Edmonton Impact just came out, they found their shots immediately, and they just laid them down on it. And on this one, I said that Boom concedes the point, even though they're all dead. That was just because when they all died, Edmonton Impact has to run in and still hit the buzzer till the time stops. Boom just, as soon as all their players came off, they just conceded the point, because then it's saving time for them to possibly make a comeback. But right now, 3-1. 3-0. This match this round was much more sitting and chilling, actually. As we can see, there wasn't a lot of movement, but when it was made, there was actually a significant gap in between. We had our first player for Edmonton Impact get killed at the 19-second mark, as well as we also had a minor penalty at the 19-second mark for Boom, which pulled out their Aztec player, so they lost both on the snake side. This pretty much restricted the Boom players into their original covers, the one they had off the break. And once they had him pinned down, especially because Impact had this man in the 50, which allowed him to fire down and keep those corners covered on both the Dorito side and also the snake side. So this was it would be difficult to move if you were in the Boom side. And then we had our movement on the flanks. Even though we had one man die soon at the 130 mark, it was the Dorito side where we saw some progression and some movement, and also some kills, giving Impact 4-0 lead. As we move into round 5, apparently I forgot to mark the points on here, but again, a round that was over in about a minute. Boom concedes 5v2 because they all died again, pretty much almost within the same time frame. We're pretty much 10 seconds apart. So they concede 5v2, and that gives a 5-0 lead on Impact has over Boom. And by this point, Boom should have been started to get pretty damn worried. They did, however, manage to be shitheads and ruin Impact's shutout. And one of these reasons is because Impact died right off the break. As we can see, their Dorito player right there at the back. And then they also lost their snake player by the 40-second mark. So a couple quick deaths gave Boom the advantage, and they managed to come in and finish off Edmonton Impact and at least get a point up on the board. But I've also noticed that it kind of makes sense, but the more often than not, if you have a player that dies right off the break, you're going to lose the point, and it makes sense. You're at a one-person disadvantage, so the rest of your team needs to step up that much more. Another round that went on for a while ended roughly around, something around the 3.5-minute mark, 3-minute mark, somewhere around there. A lot of movement on this one, especially over on the Dorito side. And the match came to an end in this one. It was not a long-standing match because the time limit was so short, by this point. So Edmonton Impact just took up their positions, just held off, and Boom made an aggressive move, but it didn't really seem necessary at this point, just because it was down 6-1. You only had, it was about something like 30 seconds left on the clock, maybe 40. You could not make a comeback in that time. Maybe score a point, but in the end, Impact gets their first win of the tournament. Now, Infamous versus Impact would be a very good game, because Infamous is another long-standing team that has done very well for themselves. However, again, they did not have the strongest beginning. As we can see that the first round of the first match against Impact didn't go very well. They ended up conceding 4v1 by about the 30-second mark, 40-second mark. As we move into the second game, into the second round, we had one player that was pulled for a penalty at the 30-second mark, which took away both their back players, which was pretty much means there'll be no movement along the wings. And once this happened, Edmonton Impact just took advantage of that snake and started moving up into it. Although they did get picked off, he managed to at least take out his opponent's snake player. And then Edmonton Impact just quickly finished off the two last Infamous players at pretty much the same time to go up 2-0. Infamous seemed to have a problem with penalties off the start, because they got a minor one right again off the break, which pulled out two of their back players, and then they're pretty much stuck with the exact same problem as they were before, in that they have no real good supporting players right now. As you can see here, Infamous makes the move into Snake 2, but then that was just as the penalties got called, and as soon as he noticed that, he saw the two players go off, he pulled back into Snake 1 because he was like, oh fuck, we're stuck. And again, because of that reason, Edmonton Impact managed to take advantage of the snake and a little bit on the Dorito side. As we move into the fourth round, this one was a damn good round, actually. I remember this one. It went on for a while. Lots of movement, as you can see, all around. We got a lot here on the Dorito side, and we have a lot here on the snake side as well. Early on, it was a 4v4, as both center players ended up taking each other out over there. Over here on the snake side, our snake player made the way in, as well as did Impact snake players, so we had a little bit of a square off right here. And what ended up happening, actually, was that our Impact player, got in, squeezed his way through. On the other side, over here, for the Infamous side, he was still squeezed in there as our Impact player came out. He had a better angle and better mobility. He managed to run by the Infamous gun while pegging him out. However, he did not last long, because very soon after he moved up into the, I guess that would be, what is that? 1, 2, 3. I guess that's Snake 4 or 5. On Infamous side, but got pegged immediately because we had a supporting Infamous come down from Aztec 2 to Aztec 1, and he just picked them off as he tried to make his move. In the end, though, Impact got the goal, and that was due to good movement here over on the Dorito side, actually. As we can see, our two supporting Dorito players made their way up, and then the original Dorito player was the one who made a big run around over here. That was because he made a big run around here, and he pegged out the final player and managed to hit the buzzer, giving Infamous a 4-0 lead. Sorry, Impact a 4-0 lead. Next round didn't go much better for Infamous, and it was actually a similar round, as a lot of movement on the snake side. But in the end, Impact got the point. We had another minor penalty in the 6th round for Infamous. Again, they were having a lot of troubles on this one, so they got 2 players pulled immediately because of that. Their center player was out very quickly, and the last 2 were just mopped up. They wiped the floor with Infamous in that round. So for this round, again, a lot of movement on the wings. Over here on the snake side, we had actually a face-off, as we had our one Impact player who moved into the Snake early, and he was here by the just under the 2-minute mark. We also had another one in the Snake 1 for the infamous side, but they were kind of firing off and hitting their own, like they were targeting their own players, but eventually they notice each other and they start squaring off. And then so Infamous makes this move, squeezing in along the side, trying to surprise them, but they ended up tagging each other out, actually, in fact. And it was slow progression here, as we could see along the the Dorito side. We didn't actually make our way up into the 50 Dorito until about the 4-minute mark. And the two Edmonton Impact players were supporting each other. As you can see there, one was moving, the other was moving behind them. And as they worked their way up, this is where they managed to peg out the last two players for Infamous, which was over here on the Dorito side of 420, and then the Aztec 2 over at 424. Is that the end of the match? And that was the end of the match. Impact got shutting out Infamous, which was surprising considering the game they just played against Iron Man the day before. So for the first round for this match between Uprising versus Impact, it was a little difficult to keep track because when you're watching the game, they have little tick markers showing how many players are present on each team. But this was inactive for the first round, so I did my best to keep track of when people died, but it was a little difficult during this match. But in the end, Impact ended up claiming the first point of the match. And again, pretty early in for this. It was only the first round only lasted about a minute. And they were kind of on and off for the rest of the match with the player markers saying where they were. So some of these, if they're not as detailed, that's why. But over here, we had another good match between the two as things got a little bit bogged down. Not that that's always bad, though. It's not always boring. It's actually kind of cool sometimes to watch them fight it out. But as we can see, there was a lot of slow progression over here. We had a couple players that died early on. We had a death right off for Uprising right off the break at the 3-second mark. And we also had two fairly early deaths for Impact as we lost our center player at the 50 can at the 35 mark, and then we also lost our snake player at the 42-second mark. This caused Impact to hold back a little bit and play a little more defensively, as suddenly they were at a 4-3 disadvantage. But as the game progressed, Impact made their moves. They started making their moves upward because this is actually the one thing about Uprising. Uprising didn't take advantage in this round about having the extra man advantage. It may have been related to that they didn't know they had the advantage, possibly. They may not have been able to. They may not have counted all the players properly and then may have thought they were on even ground or something like that. But for a few minutes, Uprising didn't really make a move on Impact. So when Impact started, when Impact started to tag out another player and they were starting to get on more even grounds, they started making their moves again. And this is what ended up winning them the point for the second round, was the fact that really it was because Uprising didn't take advantage of their advantage. This was another match that was it was a little hard to tell what was going on, but there was definitely a lot of movement over here for Uprising on the snake side. There's a little more movement as well, but again, it was hard to keep track. In the end, Edmonton Impact got taken all out, and this put the points to 2-1, giving only a 1-point lead for Impact. This one was a little bit interesting. It was a very good match, and Impact actually had, what they ended up doing is the match went on for a while. They found themselves with a 2-1 advantage, as we see this player over here. He was originally in the center can for Uprising. He makes his way all the way out to the far Aztec, and then he makes his way up all the way into Impact's side of the snake by the 250 mark. And what ended up happening is he was picking off the players. Impact was getting picked off, but they were making their moves upside on the Dorito side, and that's where they were dominating. So they had 2 players on the Dorito side that were firing down. So one player, as we can see here, was, I believe, their original Dorito player. Yeah, so Impact's original Dorito player made the run all the way around, and he hits the buzzer at the 305 mark, which should have given him the point. However, it turned out to be a dirty hang. Like half a second before he hit that buzzer, the Uprising player over here sitting on the snake ended up picking off a shot on him. So he got hit and then he hit the buzzer, which would make that a penalty, meaning that another Impact player would get taken out. So it was a difficult situation. Impact hits the buzzer. Impact makes the run. Uprising tags him just before he hit the buzzer, and then Uprising gets tagged himself by the second Impact player, who, as we can see here, he was over by the Dorito side, and then at the 3-minute mark, he makes a run on Impact side through the pocket as he was heading towards this lone player, and he tagged him right after he tagged the Impact player hitting the buzzer. So because of this reason, it was very close proximity. The referees had to debate it for a while, but because of what ended up happening, and it was considered a dirty hang, that would be a penalty for Impact, which means that their player would get pulled out. The one who's making that run across the pocket at the 3-minute, he technically is then considered dead before he tags out Uprising's member. So by technicality, Uprising Snake player is still alive and the only remaining player on the field, so they give the point to Uprising, bringing it up to 2-2. I actually thought Impact got the point at first, which you could see up here that I ended up deleting it. I ended up eventually at one point having it at 3-1. Then they were having the controversy in between the rounds, and then they ended up awarding the point to Uprising over it, so I had to go back and change that. But then Impact came out with a fury in round 5 after that. They were not happy that that point got taken away from them, and they managed to, and they pushed their way up, and they managed to make Uprising concede the point when it was a 4v1. So they take a 3-2 advantage again. And once again, even though Impact actually loses a player off the break, so does Uprising. Uprising makes their move up, but Edmonton Impact plays a very good defensive game, and they manage to fight off the. They manage to fight them down, and Uprising again concedes a 4v1, which brings it up to 4-2 for Impact. So we saw an aggressive move on the Snake side for Uprising because of that, and Impact just ended up sitting back and taking their shots. Although they nearly lost it too, because as we can see, 4 got tagged out. We also had an aggressive run up the middle right off the start by Uprising's player, but it wasn't enough, and Impact took it 5-2. So here we make it into the quarterfinals, and we got Impact versus Damage. Damage is another good game. Is another good team, and it should be a good match in between. Impact got the first point. Impact got the first point, and I actually think one of the reasons is because of a gun jam here at 1 minute, which took him out of the play for about 10 seconds over here on Damage's side, and he wasn't able to cover for this approach up on the Dorito side. So Impact takes an early lead. Then we see a fast-paced match along the wings for Damage's side, and it worked pretty well for them, because as we see that 4 of their players were taken out before the 40-second mark. And this left one more Impact player alive, who managed to actually hold out for a while on his own, but eventually he ended up getting picked off. He did get a little revenge on his buddies, because as we look here up at the Dorito side for Damage, they lost a player at the 48 mark, so he managed to get a little revenge for him before he lost. So then we had another slow match on this one with a lot of Snake side action. But in the end, Damage actually took a lead on this one by round 3. So I started to get nervous at this point. Not willing to be outdone, Impact comes back and makes very fast work of damage, especially off the start, and they manage to tie it back up. So for Impact on this point, they actually got into a bit of trouble because they ended up getting a penalty, and one got pulled over here, which I believe was this Dorito player got pulled for the penalty, but then right after we also had the one at the standing up bunker who got shot out. So because of this, Damage and Impact conceded the point to Damage, giving Damage a 3-2 advantage because they were left with a 4v2. Despite having one dead off the break, Impact managed to bring it back on this one and tagged out almost all their opponents very early, as we can see. Whenever Impact goes down like that, they seem to come back with a fury. So yeah, down here I thought there was a move, but it turned out it wasn't made, so I ended up canceling that move that was made. But as we can see, this was mostly a Dorito side match, and because Impact has a very good Dorito player, and that's why they seem to dominate this round. I think the fact that most of the combat seems to take place on that side right now, that's why Impact is doing so well. And they force Damage to concede the point at 4v1. And once again, coming in with the Fury, Edmonton Impact takes and manages to make Damage concede at a 4v2. Giving them a two-point advantage, and this is getting close to the end. Damage made a good run, but in the end, Impact managed to finish them off with about 16 seconds, and they ended up mercy ruling them, which is they didn't end up hitting the buzzer, and they just let the time run out on its own, rather than be dicks, and score that extra point. So for the semifinal games, Impact ended up going up against San Antonio X Factor. Not a pushover team. X Factor has proven that they can hold their own, and have actually claimed a few titles of their own. So this was going to be an interesting matchup to see. But early off the start, Edmonton Impact took an advantage, which is not looking good for X Factor, because whenever Edmonton Impact comes up early, they generally win the game. So just under a minute and a half or so for this matchup, and it ended up being that X Factor conceded the point because they were down a 5v2. Not a good start when you're going up against the best team in the world, Impact. And again, this is where we're starting to see the dangers of conceding points. At a 3v1, you have very low likelihood of winning. And in this situation, it really was the best choice because we're early into the game and not that much time has gone by. You're a few minutes in, maybe. But we can see that 2 concessions, and we're up 2-0 for Impact on this one. This is because we had a minor penalty up here for X Factor at the 50. These two players, Edmonton Impact and X Factor, faced off at the 50, and they were shooting over the groove there at each other. Impact made the first hit, but then player for X Factor hits him back. So because he's been tagged and he makes a shot, he gets called on a penalty, which pulls out their Dorito player. So their back player at the can moves over to take over once their player has been taken out. But once he does that, his fellow can player was also shot out. During this penalty, Impact took advantage of that Dorito side, moving themselves up. They did have one player that was knocked out because of that, but they still got their player upwards to Dorito 4, which put them in a great advantage. In the end, as stated, they conceded to make a 2-0 advantage for Impact. Now this one was a very long match. This one was a little over, just under 5 minutes, I believe, for the whole matchup. Impact made a lot of moves on their snake side, and it seemed to work out for them because, as we can see, they got 2 in there, and they made a lot of good deaths against San Antonio X Factor. San Antonio X Factor lost their snake player early on and their mid player. This was actually due to Impact's center player. He made a drastic run right off the start. He managed to get the snake player first. He spun to get the center player. However, he himself got shot out, and I believe that was by the Dorito player for X Factor sitting there. So as the game goes on, the only remaining X Factor member is sitting here in Dorito 2. See, he mistakens where one player is because he's over here at Dorito. He's over here at Dorito 5, which would be Dorito 4 for X Factor. That's where he's sitting. X Factor makes his run up. He's going to try and make a flanking maneuver on Dorito 4, where he believes that the player is currently residing. One got shot out of there earlier that game, but he's not. So as he makes his run by, he notices that the Impact player is actually one Dorito further up than he originally thought, and he tries to make the turn to take the shot, which he does manage to actually pull off, and that was because the Impact player missed him. But as he got up to that point, he got shot out by the rest of the Impact players, and that gave a 3-0 advantage. Alright, this one was the very long round, because as we can see up here, the time limit got up to 6:08 when a move was made, and the round went from 9:16 to 3:37, and by the end of it, it was a 4v3. Yeah, a lot of moves, but not a lot of deaths on this one, actually. The first death did take place off the break, though, for X Factor. As we can see, he makes his way. He starts off in Dorito 3, but then that's where he gets tagged. And then there's slow movement going on throughout the game. Our Dorito player on the Impact side only makes it up to Dorito 4 by the 1 minute mark, but then that's where he sits the rest of the game. Same goes for our center player. He makes it up there about 2:30 mark, and he sits there for the rest of the game as they're firing down on each other. And even look here on our stake side, he doesn't move into there until the 3:22 mark. Then he moves to the second insert at the 3:58, and he doesn't even get into the snake till the 5-minute mark. Over here on the X Factor side, on the bottom right, he doesn't get into the snake till the 6-minute mark, almost 6.5-minute mark. So eventually, X Factor ended up conceding this point because they were running really short on time, and they were already down to 3-0 to begin with. And if they had any hopes of getting back in this game, they had to concede the point, because this match did not look like it was going to end anytime soon. It probably could have gone the rest of the game, honestly, if they had let them go. But X Factor couldn't afford this. Impact could. They were up 3-0, but X Factor had to get back in this game, so they conceded the point in a desperate attempt to make up that 4-0. And then this one was the complete opposite of the last one, because we just made it up to about the 1 minute mark or so, and by the time X Factor concedes the point, because they're down 4v2. Although at this point, because again we're pretty late in time, I think conceding the point is kind of useless at this point. You're just giving another one away, and it doesn't matter at this point. So round 6 didn't go any better for our X Factor friends, as they had 2 dead off the break, and then they lost one at the 7-minute mark as X Factor center made a great run up. Before getting tagged, he actually got tagged out first though, so he got issued a minor penalty, and then we had our Impact Dorito player taken out. We also had another can player that died. X Factor's can player here at the back made a pretty good run though. As we can see, he goes down to the Aztec 2 all the way into the snake, and he makes his way all the way up to the actually onto the Impact side before by the 42nd mark, 37 mark. At this point, Impact's Aztec player saw him, and he makes the run up and manages to shoot him out, and then jumps into the 50 Dorito, the 50 snake. Impact finishes off X Factor, and they take it 6-0. So again, in this one, Impact didn't end up mercy ruling X Factor because we only had about a minute left in the game, and they ended up finishing off all their players. So again, they just decided not to hit the buzzer. So that means Impact makes it to the finals against Dynasty. Now, Dynasty themselves have been labeled before as the best team in the world, but they lost this to Impact. So this was going to be a nice little rivalry to see going in. And the first round did not disappoint. As we can see, it was a good match that went on for a while, well into the 2-minute mark. A lot of movement. Well, not a lot of movement, but we did see movement along both sides. It was a good, exciting match, but in the end, Dynasty was forced to concede it when they were down 4v1. This one was all about the center and the snake for this one, actually. As we can see here, there was 3 deaths right up in the center. We also had one that was died in the Dorito, but it seemed that it was like almost a little closer to the center for this one. Then we also had some movement along the snake. Impact ends up finishing off Dynasty this round. So we see Dynasty once again getting into a little bit of trouble, as they have 2 people dead off the 7-second mark, and then they lose another at the 19-second mark. Their Dorito player makes it up to Dorito 3 off the break for Impact, and then he moves his way up into Dorito 5 by the 22nd mark. This gave him a great shooting advantage over Dynasty. And we also see that our back player came in to support him on that, and this just made it slim pickings, quick pickings for Impact, who ends up taking it 3-0 after Dynasty concedes at a 5v2. So as you can see, aside for the first game, Impact has more or less been dominating this tournament. And you can imagine how many haters they have because of this. It was interesting to see the snake play on this one. I was actually surprised that it lasted for so long, considering the reputation the snake has had for this tournament. Dynasty losing their snake player right off the break. But then everyone manages to stay alive for some time until about the 1 minute mark, as we see that Impact makes a run up the middle and they tag each other out. Both center players tag each other out. But over here on the snake side for Impact, it was very well done, actually. He ends up getting himself into the snake right off the bat, snake 2, and he stays there for a while before making his way around, sort of looping around. And this is interesting up here, because then we see at the 2:04 mark, he makes his way all the way up into the Dynasty side snake. So what ended up happening earlier, as we can see, their Dynasty's can player at the 1.5-minute mark ran back to cover the Aztec after they lost their snake player. As Impact's snake player is sitting there targeting him, it was actually a very risky move. I was surprised he made it, but Dynasty's snake player makes the move back in Aztec 1, the 2:24, to at which point Impact's player down here at the snake jumps over the snake onto the other side to give himself better coverage, and he nearly got hit doing it. He did that the 2:25. He did that, and right as he made that move, just a stream of paint came and nearly hit him. So Dynasty's player, seeing the vulnerability of Impact's snake player, starts making a run up here at 2:43. However, Impact's player is ready for this, and he manages to tag him out. Actually, even though you can't really tell it from here, he actually kind of stuck his head out over top of this bunker here and shot him out before he came around. Which if Dynasty's player had managed to do, they probably would have traded out because his flank would have been exposed. But by round 4, Impact takes it 4-0. This is the finals, remember? It's a damn good start for your finals if you're Impact. Damn terrible if you're Dynasty. But Dynasty at least manages to get up on the board for this one, which again was a little bit surprising because they had an early death here at the 30. And not super early, but considering where they're sitting, it's kind of necessary to keep as many players alive as possible. But Edmonton Impact losing 2 players within a few seconds of each other. And they were forced to play a more defensive game on this, but in the end they couldn't hold out, because as Dynasty moved their way up the field, especially on that snake side, they managed to start picking them off. So at least Dynasty manages to ruin Impact's shutout, making it 4-1. As we can see here, Dynasty starts building up some steam. I don't know why I switch off of between Dynasty and Dynasty, but I do. And this was kind of surprising because they lost 2 players, both on Dorito's side, off the break. But we can see by the 1 minute mark, their snake side Aztec player, after their one player has made their way into snake 1 from the insert bunkers, he makes his way all the way back across, stopping in very briefly at Dorito 1 before he runs up to Dorito 3. So at this point, there's 2 left alive for Dynasty. and our Impact player makes a nice run all the way downfield, and he ends up tagging out Dynasty's player. Dynasty's Dorito player over here, who made the great run, he managed making a crossfire shot on him and taking him out. Our Impact player was hoping to get him out, get over to the bunker, and either peg off our last Dynasty player over here at the Dorito, or make a run for the buzzer, one of the two. But he managed to get picked off by good shooting and actually good strategic playing over here by the Snake side player, who made the move over to the Dorito side to give support and actually peg out a couple extra players over there. So now we have a bit more of a game. It's 4-2, but time is starting to tick away. As we head into the 7th round, we can see that this round lasted for a little while. And some moves were kind of all over the place, such as the center player. He originally moves his way up after he makes a stop in at the can. He makes his way up to the 50 at the 27 mark, and he moves down towards the Snake side to fire a little bit there, but then he moves his way back by 115 over to the Dorito side. And that's why in the yellow over here is just the same guy, just making the move back over here to the Snake side, but he eventually gets ticked off. Dynasty makes a good scramble, getting a heavy force into the Snake side, as we have two in there, although one gets pegged off. We also had a minor penalty over here for Impact. However, it was kind of redundant because he was the last player on the field, so he got a penalty and there was no other players to take out. So 4-3 for Impact, but things are getting interesting. So we had 57 seconds left on the clock of the final match. Dynasty needs to get this in order to get the tie. We see here they made a very aggressive run up the Dorito side, as well as they made also a very aggressive run into the Snake side, getting someone in there immediately, as well as getting a support in there right behind him as he moves in. And you know what? They came close, actually. Their center player ends up trading out with Impact center player over here. We also lose the original Dynasty Dorito player up here at the 22-second mark at Dorito 4, but their back player makes a good run into the Dorito. He actually originally went there to support, but after the Dorito player gets taken out, he comes and makes a long run all the way down, taking out Impact's Dorito player. And I think actually it was possible, because they still had two open members, two alive players here on the Snake. I think that if they had more time, Dynasty could have gotten that point and tied it up. But the time ran out, which gave Impact the win, and Impact won the World Cup. It was kind of nice to see that the team that I supported won the World Cup. Even though they won it last year, a lot of people probably are hating on that because you don't like to see the same team win multiple years in a row. But personally, I enjoyed it, watching them play, and I enjoyed seeing my team win. Watched all their games. Watched a few others as well, but there were so many teams that were playing, you can't watch them all. So that pretty much brings us to the end of paintball season this year, and very soon we will see the season start up all over again. We'll go back through all the tournaments, and it'll be great to watch. And when those tournaments come up, I'm going to put out some episodes where I'll be discussing the tournaments and how Edmonton Impact does. Most likely Edmonton Impact. If my team preferences changes, then I'll change which team I talk about, but right now Edmonton Impact is my favorite one. But yeah, a little bit different on the podcast today, but I thought it'd be interesting and something I want to talk about. But thank you for joining me today. I am Adrian Lloyd. This is just my stupid opinion.